All right, guys, I'm here with Patrick. I really, really appreciate you doing this. I think people are going to be fascinated by everything you've got to share. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I know it took a while for us to make this meeting happen, but
For
I'm glad
sure.
to be here.
I think you've got some disclaimers that you've got to read, right? And then we can get into it.
So I'm an active DEA agent, so I'm not here representing the agency, so everything I say here are my views and not necessarily representative of DEA, DOJ, or the U.S. government.
Perfect. Me either. I'm here on my own as well. All right. So before we get into the DEA and kind of how the things that you do, with crypto, let's talk about your background because you've got a fascinating background. We actually were in Iraq at the same time doing two very different things. So maybe let's start with college and the program you went through and where that led you to.
Yeah. So I went to undergrad at a place called Mercyhurst University. And they had an intelligence studies program, and it was I entered in 2002, so it wasn't too far after 9/11. So I knew I wanted to do something in the counterterrorism realm. So, I was looking for something to do after high school, and I saw Mercyhurst College, and I thought that's it. So what I wanted to do was go to the CIA and be a spy and work on counterterrorism issues. So I did that, and when I was a junior, I got a conditional offer from the CIA to be an analyst for them. So the CIA is broken up between, part of what they do is analysis, and the other part is operations. So I was going through the interview process for an analytic role, but what I really wanted to do was the operations side, the case officer stuff. So
The Jason Bourne stuff.
Exactly, the Jason Bourne stuff. So I went to my recruiter and I was like, hey, listen, I think this is great that we're going down this path, but I think the operational side would be better suited to me. So is there any way you could slide my my package into the operations side of the house? And he did. And then I had one phone call with the operations side, and they're like, man, you need more experience. You're a junior in college. So at that same time, I did put out some feelers for different companies that worked in the intelligence community in the counterterrorism side of the house. One of them was Northrop Grumman, and I got an offer from Northrop Grumman, and I took that because I knew that would lead me to Iraq, and that's what I really wanted to do because it was right when the global war on terrorism started.
And this is a private corporation that essentially provides support both analytical and operationally to intelligence agencies, the military, etc.
Exactly, yeah. So there's a handful of companies that supplement the government workforce. And really at that time, there was so much work to be done. Governments couldn't accomplish the mission on their own, so they brought in private companies to supplement the workforce, and they cleared everyone just as they would government employees to work on these sensitive issues.
So junior, you finish up school.
Yeah.
What do they do to prepare you to go to Iraq?
They nothing. Nothing really. It was a whole lot of on-the-job training. So you integrate with the team and you talk to you're going there when you sign up, but you don't really know what to expect. But when you meet the team and you talk to people who've done it before, it really takes a lot of the mystique and fear out of it. So you work U.S. based for a while, figure out the job, and then you get shipped overseas.
And are you doing I'll call it combat training, right? Kind of different aspects to that, but learning to shoot, move, communicate. Are you going to gun ranges? Like, is there some of that training, or is it literally just go figure it out?
No, yeah, there's training. So you do. They give you government-sponsored personnel security training. What to do if you're in a bad situation overseas. Just general good practices to adhere to overseas. And there was a little bit of firearms training because when you were moving around outside of the bases, you did have a sidearm or a rifle. So we got a little bit of training on that.
Got it. And so you go to Iraq. How old are you when you go?
Let's see. It was first time over there was 2007. So man, I think I was 25 at the time.
Yeah. Pretty young.
Yeah, pretty young. Yeah.
So you were there in 2007 for a number of years, kind of on and off.
Yeah, so I was there on and off between 2007 and 2010. So we would do essentially like a 2 to 3 month deployment, then come back for a handful of months, then go back and just repeat that cycle until you threw in the towel and said that was enough.
Yeah, I was there in 2008, 2009, and so have some context as to the experience. But you were doing much different things, right?
Yeah.
So maybe describe some of the things that you were actually doing on a day-to-day basis while there.
Yeah, so I was officially, my title was an all-source analyst. So I worked with a lot of the government agencies to go after the Al-Qaeda in Iraq high-value targets at that time. So one of the guys that I was looking at was Abu Umar al-Baghdadi, and he was kind of my main account, and I would just work with all of the information that we had. I'd take information from all the government agencies, militaries, kind of bring them together and try to determine this guy's network, where he's located, and try to figure out ways on how to capture him.
Yeah, and so to kind of translate this for people who aren't familiar with the government agencies, the military, et cetera, is if you've ever seen the movie, what is it, Zero Dark 30, right?
Yeah.
I think is where they go and they chase down Osama bin Laden. The woman in the movie that works for the CIA is basically a case officer on that case to find bin Laden.
Right.
It's overgeneralization, but you were doing a similar thing to go find a different high-value individual, but very similar in terms of the work that's done to try to locate these folks.
Yeah, and it's very much a team effort, and overseas, all of these agencies work together to really push forward the mission. So, and that's right. I mean, I would work with, I wasn't a case officer, but I would work with case officers and get their info and, talk to their sources if I could to get additional information just to kind of push forward our mission.
And then, so as you're doing this and you're gathering information, you are using the information that others have gathered and kind of working in that team. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Are you staying in one place? Are you kind of going back and forth, to different bases?
Yeah. Most of my time was in the green zone, but I did travel around quite a bit, and it was just meeting with other military units that were very specialized in sensitive site exploitation. So, and that means these guys that go in and do a raid on a certain location, they knew exactly what to look for, what items had evidentiary value. So cell phones, SIM cards, where are SIM cards typically hidden? Is there like a code network? Are they writing certain codes in notebooks to look for? Things like that. So I'd go around and interview people that really knew what they were talking about to try to bring that back to my unit. And
got it. And part of this too is there's almost stages to these raids, right? Sometimes whether it's the military, the government, a private agency, you're going in and a lot of times you're raiding because you're trying to capture somebody who has done bad things or is a bad person. Then there is, once you've either been successful or not, then you're looking around for quote unquote evidence, right? Which you're describing of, you actually don't even know what's on the cell phone. You don't know what's on the hard drive. You just know that is the highest probability place where the sensitive information is.
Yeah.
And then you've got to gather that and extract it back to a base where whether you or somebody else on the team looks through it. And so there's a lot of data involved there, right? And kind of like, the way people have described that type of work to me is it's quite boring because you're looking for a needle in a haystack to some degree. But then when you find it, it can be the difference in a case or the work.
Yeah, parts of it were boring, and you do experience information overload and data overload. And that was one of the things that I did. So I would receive all of the media that were taken on raids. So cell phones, laptops, thumb drives, anything that the operators found out on these raids, they'd bring it back and I'd rip it, put the information into our systems and analyze it to see if I could make sense of it and get it to lead us into the right direction.
How much of the information that you're consuming and analyzing is in English versus Arabic or some other language?
Yeah, it was all in Arabic.
All in Arabic.
Yeah.
And you're a fluent Arabic speaker?
No, we had a lot of linguistic support. So anything that I got, I'd have to make an appointment with the linguist team, and that was one of the hardest parts. Was one, they were spread way too thin, so it was tough to get a meeting with them, and two, when you have all of this data in Arabic, having somebody else read it to you, they don't necessarily know what's important. So if you seized a notebook and needed it translated, it would take days for them to translate everything in the notebook, and they don't necessarily know what's important. So you don't want to have them not translate too much, but you don't want to have them, just bogged down on something that's not too important. So there was always that balance to try to make sure we were really maximizing our efforts and being as efficient as possible.
Yeah, the complexity of this job cannot be overstated, in my opinion, and just that it's not only the collection, which involves physical danger and all of that, but just the organization, the structure of the data once you get it, then the translation, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of all of that, that just gets it in a position where, okay, now we have smart people who are looking at it and can try to figure out what's important and what's not, right? Okay, so you're doing this for a while, you're going on and off, back and forth in Iraq. What is at the time, what's kind of your interaction with other agencies or with like special forces and different government or military units?
Yeah, so it was really like we were working hand in hand. So I would work. We had special forces operators that were integrated into our units because they were the guys that we would work with. They were the action arm. So when we would find an actionable lead, we would brief the special forces guys up on it, and they would plan their raid on based on the information that we're giving them. So it was really hand in hand, and we worked with all the 3-letter agencies over there. And another part of what I did was just briefing what we're finding up the chain of command, so briefing the highest levels of government over there.
And as you're doing this, are you convinced you're going to be in Iraq forever and you want to do this, or did you always know you were going to kind of leave that and go do other work?
I loved it. I thought the mission was really exciting, and like I said, it was coming off of 9/11, and I had a strong sense of patriotism, and I wanted to serve, and I thought that this was a really good way to serve my country. So I was loving it. So one thing that I didn't like at the time was as an analyst, you don't have a whole lot of control over what you're working on. So I was really craving more control, and I was kind of weighing my options whether I was going to try to throw my hat in the ring for the CIA again and try to become a case officer, or even go the military route. So I was meeting with all the special forces operators to see if that was a good path for me. And there were a few retired FBI and DEA agents over there that were doing contract work for the government agencies. And I talked to them about their careers, and that seemed really interesting. So what I wanted was to be able to see something through from start to finish and really make a project my own. And it really seemed like these federal agents were able to do that. They could start an investigation, run all aspects of it, and then complete it, and then move on to the next one. And that sounded really interesting. So I threw my hat into the ring with the FBI and DEA, and ultimately decided to get on board with the DEA.
So maybe talk a little bit about what does the DEA do? I think people know drugs, but there's other things, right? And then why you chose the DEA over some of the other opportunities you had.
Yeah, so let's start with what DEA does. DEA is the Drug Enforcement Administration, and they investigate violations of the Title 21 laws. So the Controlled Substances Act, that's Title 21. And that's essentially it. Their main purpose is to investigate and bring to justice individuals and entities that sell drugs that somehow impact the United States. And anything that touches the drug world, we can also investigate. So money laundering, there's always money involved with drug trafficking, so a lot of what DEA does ties into investigating big international money laundering schemes. Drugs touch terrorism, narco-terrorism. So really anything that touches the drug trade as it affects the United States is kind of run by the DEA.
Got it. And your role when you first started was a little bit different than what you're doing today. Maybe talk a little bit about what you initially started and how you transitioned over to some of the crypto stuff.
Yeah, so I started out in 2012. I went to the Academy, and
what's that like?
Oh man,
is it fun?
Yes and no. Some people love it. Some people hate it. I think most people have a love-hate relationship, with it. I think looking back, you recognize that it was a good experience, and you made some solid friendships, and you learned a lot. And but at the time, it sucks, man.
Wait, all right. So what do you do in the academy? Is it like a lot of? I'm assuming it's kind of like basic training at the military, lots of physical training and then learning of, hey, here's the different aspects of the job.
Yeah. So it's a lot of a large part of it is firearms training because we all carry firearms, and it's imperative to be really proficient with them and responsible with them. So we do a lot of firearms training. In fact, I think our firearms training is as robust as the Secret Services. So it's really intense on that aspect. Physical fitness, that's a huge part of it. But really, the bread and butter is the classroom stuff. Understanding the drug laws, understanding how to run an investigation. Understanding how to work with the prosecutorial offices, U.S. Attorney's Office, how we partner with other agencies, and the nuts and bolts of running a drug investigation. That's kind of what we focus on. It's changing now because the drug world is changing, but a lot of what we learned was how to do proper surveillance operations and follow people around, and how to properly write these reports and affidavits so it makes sense to juries and prosecutors and the defense.
Well, and what's always fascinated me about law enforcement in general, but specifically some of the specialized agencies like the DEA, is your job is not only to catch the bad guys, right? That's the table stakes stuff. You've got to not only be able to catch them, you've got to be able to prove they've done something wrong, and then you've got to be able to prove that to a court, a judge, a jury, whoever it is, in a way that they understand, right? They don't have all the context you have. They haven't spent 6 months investigating something, and so there's a lot of steps in there that could trip you up if you don't do it the right way.
Yeah, documentation is super important, and you also have to balance. Everything we do, everything we write is eventually public. It gets unsealed. So typically, I'll write an affidavit, and it's initially sealed to not hinder the investigation. But once we're wrapping up the investigation, everything is unsealed and it's out in the public. So the bad guys can see exactly how we went about getting this information. So you really have to walk a tightrope on disclosing everything you need to, but not disclosing too much that will expose our sensitive techniques and tactics. But you really, we're a public agency and we serve the people, so you can't hide things either. So you have to balance what you share to keep it accurate and not ruin future investigations.
Got it. That makes sense. And then let's just talk before we get into specific things that are going on today. A lot of people have been excited when I've talked with other guests about drugs and all this kind of stuff on a more general basis. You probably have more experience than anybody else in terms of what's going on in that world. Yeah. How serious is the drug problem in America? And how serious I think is some of the Mexican cartel threats or other types of drugs coming from Asia? Just give us an overlay of what is the drugs in America problem look like today?
Yeah, it's there's always debate on whether legalization would solve the problem, but it is a huge problem, and if you look at the less fortunate areas across the country, opioid abuse is rampant, and you read about it in the news, and that's not that's real. It's it's happening, and it's really sad because no one that's addicted to heroin or fentanyl wants to be addicted to heroin and fentanyl. So it's pretty sad. So the problem is real, and I think enforcement does play an important role. But ultimately, what's going to change that is bringing everyone's quality of life up around the country, education, so people don't turn to drugs, and treatment and better education around it. But
Yeah.
but I think it's it's the enforcement, it's education, it's everything. It's the total package that will actually make a difference.
Yeah, and we obviously don't have enough time to go through everything, but,
Yeah.
but in previous conversations with you, I think the thing that has struck me is how reasonable, right, a lot of people inside the agency are around, look, there's really, really bad stuff that's super severe, and you're probably hard-pressed to find anyone in America that thinks that, certain drugs should be legal.
Right.
And then there's an acknowledgement that there's plenty of people who think certain drugs should be legal, right? And there's a debate, and kind of that'll play out in the courts and government, et cetera. But the DEA has a job to go do, and there's a very real impact around, if somebody's addicted to heroin, that is bad for them and usually the people around them, right? And so preventing that stuff, the prevention is not only from an enforcement standpoint, right? Can you prevent the drugs from getting into the U.S., but as you described, also educating people on, hey, you probably should never start because you may not ever stop.
Right, yeah.
Right? Okay, so when you first get started at DEA, what do you do? And then we can get into what you're doing today.
So I first started DEA, and I joined DEA. I don't think I answered this question, but why DEA over FBI or some of the other law enforcement agencies? It was right around the time, I don't know if you remember, 2010, 2012, how everything in the news was the Mexican cartels. And you couldn't get away from it. And I just thought that that was such a good mission to work. Because the cartels were so heinous, and the devastation that they were wreaking in Mexico and then bringing the drugs up to the U.S. I just thought that was a really valid mission to go after. So when I started, you don't really get to pick what you work on right out the bat. So typically when you're in the academy, if there's 50 other agents in there with you, the DEA will give you 50 vacancies, and they essentially say, hey, pick where you want to go, work it amongst yourselves, and then hopefully you'll get it. So
and there's cooperation that goes on, right?
Yeah, it's, you game the system a little bit, and you try to work with people. So if you want to get to a certain part of the country, and if you want to go to like California, LA, everyone wants to get to LA. Maybe you think, okay, well that's there's a lot of interest there. Maybe I'll go to a smaller office outside of LA that'll still give me there, less competition. So there's a little bit of that. And also, you work with each other. If somebody has a family in Nebraska and there's one Nebraska spot, a young single guy might want to go back there, but he's gonna let somebody who's family.
And look, I think this is true in most government agencies, most military units, et cetera, as people understand that there's life around the work, right? And how do we help you get where you're trying to go, but still serve the mission?
And I found that DEA has been really good with that. I mean, technically, I'm based out of the San Francisco office, on loan to New York.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I've been in New York for about 2 years now. So they're flexible for the most part when it comes to helping you out with your family life and personal life.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. So you start out in California?
Yeah, I started out in California, and I was in a satellite office of San Francisco up in Santa Rosa. And the first cases I worked were more traditional, straight up drug trafficking cases. And the first big case I worked was a heroin investigation, heroin and meth. This family that had ties to giant violent cartels down in Mexico essentially had the lion's share of the drug trade throughout Northern California. And they've been operating there for years, like decades. And, certain law enforcement agencies took a swing at them, and it was like whack-a-mole. If you would get one guy, they would just come back with more people. So my office and a few other federal agencies around the area, essentially around all of California, we had this giant operation to completely wipe out that entire drug trafficking organization out of Northern California. So it was a 2-year, it was about a 3-year long investigation where we were going up on wiretaps, and we were tracking cars and all sorts of things to identify who all the co-conspirators involved, what they're up to, the extent of their operation, their sources of supply, and gather enough evidence on everyone to ultimately bring everyone to justice. And all of those things that we did in tracking and wiretaps, all of that's done in concert with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the courts to make sure that it's a airtight case, and we can really take these guys out of operation.
And part of this is, from what I understand, you want to get to the top, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the pyramid, if you will, where that's the person making the decisions, that's the El Chapos of the world, whatever.
Yeah.
But you start at the bottom,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
it's literally like the street drug dealer is where you start, and then you kind of trace it from there, and it's hard work.
Yeah, it is, and that's essentially how that investigation started. There was just a low level. He was actually a drug user that was arrested by the local police department, and he said, "Hey, here's who sold it to me." And the PD came to our DEA office and said, "Hey, can you help us out with this case? We think it's tied to this bigger picture. Let's work these guys." And that's how it started. So we started at the very bottom and worked our way up to the upper echelons down into Mexico, and tried to take everyone out that we could, that we could identify.
And how many of these types of organizations, right? Not the one specifically that you're talking about, but just in general, what I'll call drug facilitated criminal organizations, are also doing other bad shit, right? Like, is it, hey, we're a heroin family, and that's what we do is we distribute heroin and we make a lot of money from it? Or is it, heroin is one product within our criminal organization or enterprise, and we do a bunch of bad shit?
Yeah. I think there's both. I think drugs are so lucrative, though, that the big drug trafficking organizations, the big cartels, and what you see in the show Narcos, their main cash generating activity is drug trafficking, and they will supplement that with other opportunities, but typically, from what I see, it's drug trafficking organizations are drug trafficking organizations, but there is crossover. The mafia, I'm sure, is involved in racketeering and other things, and on the side they'll sell drugs. So it's really where every organization has strengths and weaknesses. It's like a business. So if you have a unit that is involved in other things, credit card scams or something like that generates money, they wouldn't shy away from it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how many of them, through documentaries, conversations with folks like you, they look at it as a business and they run it pretty strictly like a business, right? Yeah. I mean, there are employees, there's accounting, there's distribution, supply chain, all of this stuff. It just happens to be that they're doing it illegally with illegal products. Yeah. And those people, if they kind of stayed on the right side of the law, actually would be good business people if it wasn't illegal drugs, right?
Yeah, I mean, they use a lot of the same techniques. It's like the biggest technique referenced is branding. That's the biggest correlation drawn between legit business and drug trafficking. And they do that. They'll brand, like certain cartels will brand their cocaine with their specific stamp, and it's a brand. So they do things like that, and they have clear command and control operations and distribution networks, and they're negotiating prices, and they have large networks to get money back to where it needs to be. So it's definitely run in some instances like a weirdly violent business.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you're doing this and really start out what I'll call kind of the hardcore DEA mission of let's go get drug dealers and drug distribution networks. You're in San Francisco, though, around 2014 timeframe.
Yeah, right? So but they're between 2012 and 2015, 16.
Okay. Yeah. And in San Francisco, obviously, all the Silk Road stuff's going on. Yeah. So I don't know how much you can talk about, the way that the agency was looking at that type of stuff, or if you had any interaction.
Yeah, I heard about that when I was in the academy. And,
oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
And that's we did a tour. Part of our academy was to understand, all the assets that the DEA had to run investigations, and there's just like this subset where DEA was doing some really unique things with cryptocurrencies as they applied to drug trafficking. And I was hooked. I was like, I'm definitely going to be working on that. But yeah, I wish I could get into it more. But I think they were really forward-leaning in seeing the trend, and they wanted to get behind the eight ball on that one. So
this is 2012. 13,
yeah, this was 2012.
Right?
Yeah. So and that's kind of like at the peak of Silk Road's operations when all of that nonsense was going down.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess really the way that the DEA kind of intersects with the Silk Road or cryptocurrencies is folks are using it to buy and sell drugs, move money around the world, kind of a whole bunch of different use cases that are needed by criminals.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's it, and that's kind of like the way I see it. DEA's first entrance into the cyber realm, as we know now, was Silk Road, essentially the first darknet marketplace. Mm-hmm. When it became so easy to just buy and sell drugs and tons of other illicit things online. And there was, people recognized that we have to get behind this. So that's how DEAs became involved in darknets and cyber and cryptocurrency specifically on how it is used to purchase drugs online. And, drug trafficking started, it became really prevalent and well known with the darknet marketplaces, but you can find it in ClearNet as well. Mm-hmm. People selling drugs from different countries, and it's really something that all federal governments and law enforcement agencies are keeping an eye on now.
Yeah, and so maybe let's talk, before we get into what people are doing with crypto and some of the things you see today, let's talk about how you transition from hardcore, I'm only going after, or mainly going after drug distribution networks and the cartels, to more crypto-related stuff. Like, how does that transition work?
Yeah, so DEA is kind of like a time-based, do your time sort of thing, and then kind of ask for something you want to get into. So
transfer or something.
Yeah. So I worked in the Santa Rosa office for a few years, and then when after I made a few cases, I did an undercover case where we were posing as a biker gang, believe it or not, and I'm not kind of a clean cut sort of guy. So we were driving around Harleys.
You were on Harleys with like the jackets and everything.
Yeah, leather jackets, Harleys. I grew my hair out long. I had what I could grow of a beard, and we were. There was this drug trafficking network that we couldn't get into. We had no sources. We had nothing, and we're like, hey, let's just pretend like we're bad dudes and see if they start selling us stuff. So we did that. We dressed up like bikers, and I was with a few other guys that actually looked the part. They were older school officers and agents, and they
rode the Harleys on the weekends for fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they used their personal Harleys for that. I had to use one of the DEAs, but that was a pretty interesting case, and we'd buy heroin and drugs and get enough evidence on these guys. So
when you're undercover and you're like, I got long hair, I got my jacket on, right? Whether you're armed or not, you're on your Harley and you're like going to meet up to buy drugs. Are you ever like, I live a fucking wild life?
Yeah, sort of. But I'm also like, what am I doing? I don't fit this part at all. They're gonna.
You're like worried, right? You're like, oh, they're definitely gonna.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't feel like I'm very good at undercover work because you have to be able to talk, and the guys that are really good at it, they know how to talk the talk. Mm-hmm. It's an art form, and the guys that I were working with, they could talk to these guys, and they didn't skip a beat. They knew exactly what to say, and I'm just kind of sitting there watching. I'm like, how is he doing this? This is so impressive. But I mean, it's like, it's weird though when I tell my friends about some of the stuff that I'm working on. They're always like, man, your job is so crazy, but I feel like it's like
it's dangerous too.
It could be, but you don't feel it when you're doing it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, this is a job. It's like, just the same way somebody else works at a desk job. Some of the stuff you do becomes a job. What I do is I fully recognize that it's a little different than what a lot of people are working on, but ultimately it does sometimes just feel like a job. And it's unique when people ask me that question.
Did you take a picture of you guys all, right? Like you got to kind of time stamp that one.
Yeah, I documented that one for the files. Yeah.
People get dressed up for Halloween. You just put on your undercover outfit and roll.
Yeah, it's so funny. No one believes me. They're like, no one would sell you drugs because you clearly are a cop.
Look, it is funny. I'll be walking around the streets of New York with my girlfriend, and I'll walk by somebody, and I'll literally nod my head at them or something. She's like, what the hell was that? I was like, he was in the military.
Yeah.
But I can tell you a million reasons why I think that, but like a high degree of confidence. And you do recognize whether it's the way they carry themselves, the haircut, the whatever. You just see it, right?
No, it's totally true. It's like that, was that Gladwell who wrote the book Blink?
Yep.
It's totally that thing, and I'm the same way with, I spent plenty of time around military and law enforcement. So if there's somebody completely in plain clothes, even if they're all tatted up and beard, I'm like, that. I know he's a cop. Yeah,
it's so funny because the criminals don't know. Right?
Yeah,
a lot of times they don't know.
A lot of times they don't. Yeah.
If they wanted to learn how to find the cops, they should just hang out with more cops, right?
Yeah, exactly,
and then they would eventually pick it up. Yeah. All right, so you go from riding Harleys with long hair, the whole outfit, to then you are getting into crypto. How does that transition?
Yeah, so I requested a transfer to San Francisco's financial investigative team. And that's when I started to dive into the crypto world. And
that team is still part of the DEA, but describe a little bit how that team interacts with, or why that's set up, given an organization that's tasked with drugs.
Yeah, so there are financial investigative teams all around the country, and the way DEA works and the way a lot of federal law enforcement works, we have division offices around the country and around the world. So each office handles kind of their area. So San Francisco handles Northern California, and essentially, while federal agents have jurisdiction to go all around the U.S., we kind of focus on what's impacting our local area. And ultimately, that's usually where cases start, and then they will spiderweb out from there. So each office essentially has a financial investigative team to handle the money laundering side of investigations, which there typically always is a money laundering side. And it's just a little different of an investigation. You have to go through bank records. You have to know where to get some of the documents, and you have to really have a lot of patience to go through hundreds of thousands of documents to find, to really piece together these larger money laundering schemes and just follow the money essentially. So it's a little different skill set.
So this time when you're doing kind of intelligence type work, right? At least now it's in English. It's not in Arabic, right? So there's some it's gotten easier as your career's gone on. But let's talk. I think a lot of people hear money laundering and they actually don't even know what that means. So maybe just describe what money laundering is, and then we can talk about how criminals use it and why they do it.
Yeah. Well, at its most basic level, I guess money laundering is essentially using financial instruments to either hide a specified unlawful activity or facilitate a specified unlawful activity. So that's the caveat there, the specified unlawful activity. Anytime you acquire money or use money to do something illegal and put that money into a credible financial institution, that becomes money laundering. For DEA, the specified unlawful activity is always drugs, but it could be anything. FBI investigates thefts, stolen art. That proceeds from that could be the specified unlawful.
Yeah, because I think most people, when they think of money laundering, they're thinking, hey, the act of money laundering is actually
buying a car wash.
You give me money, right, through some drug deal, and money laundering isn't me just putting it in the bank. It's me putting it through my business so that then it looks like legitimate revenue for the business. Right?
Yeah,
that's a form.
That's a form, yeah.
But actually just putting it in the bank and using it could also be money laundering.
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, but I think as long as you're using the financial instruments, at least in the U.S., and the proceeds are from something illicit or to facilitate something illicit, that then becomes money laundering. Yeah.
And so obviously there's multiple currencies in the world, right? So you kind of go over to the financial investigations unit, and I think the public narrative around crypto, Bitcoin, et cetera, is that's for drug dealers, right? That's the drug dealer's money. Maybe let's start with when you first move over to that unit, what was the understanding of cryptocurrency versus, let's say, U.S. dollars, and how is the agency thinking about it? And then we can kind of talk about how that's evolved.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how the agency, agency is thinking about it, but at that time, it was still very much geared towards illicit stuff online, because I think at that time like 30% of Bitcoin transactions were somehow involved with something illegal.
Illegal, yeah.
Now the number has dropped substantially. So at that time, I think everyone was interested in it, but it was still viewed as something to facilitate illegal activity.
And when you say it's dropped substantially, any kind of ballpark number what you guys think it is today?
Well, I think it's the latest figures are below 1% of
1%.
all the economic value of Bitcoin right now is below 1%. And what's interesting about that is I think that's a smaller number than like regular money laundering, like fiat money laundering. I think.
Well, so I definitely want to talk about the comparison between fiat and crypto and like what you see there, what you actually would prefer somebody to use, etc.
Yeah. So, well, for fiat, I think the estimates, and I don't know if this is still accurate, but it's like 2% of global GDP is illicit, perhaps. I think that's the figure.
I think Bloomberg had an article in end of 2018 that said $2 trillion is laundered through fiat every year, which it probably is close to
something around
close
2%,
to
So if you, it's kind of comparing apples to oranges, but if you take those two figures, having illicit Bitcoin activity being below 1%, I mean that's kind of at least on par with what we're seeing in fiat traditional money laundering.
And in the fiat world versus crypto, let's talk a little bit about, I don't want to say the benefits to criminals, but maybe the benefits to law enforcement catching somebody doing illicit activity. I'm guessing, and I'm hoping that you say, crypto is easier to catch bad people doing bad things than US dollar cash, but the banking system itself, kind of electronic money, it may actually be easier to catch them using that than crypto, or kind of how would you rank those in terms of ease?
So cash is tough, right? Cash, there's no record unless somebody's keeping great record books, and oftentimes we'll look for that, accounting books. But cash is completely anonymous, so that can be very difficult to track. What's nice about for investigators with traditional fiat money laundering is it often does have to hit a financial institution, and there are laws where these financial institutions have to give us information on that, and we have places where we can submit a legal process to get that information, and that process has been cemented over years. So
well
everyone
documented.
Everyone understands it.
And so really what you're talking here is there's a separation between the banking system and physical paper money, right? The physical paper money is actually very difficult to track.
Yeah, super difficult. So
the banking system is much easier.
But still, I mean, you still have to know where to look. The banks are compelled to give certain information that is suspicious, and transactions above a certain amount, they have to give that information to the government. But I mean, there's hundreds of trillions of dollars going through the bank accounts every day, so it's tough you still have to know where to look. So a lot of the money laundering schemes that we uncover, we already know that they're
where to look,
and then at that point, it's just kind of identifying the scope, all of the accounts used, all of the individuals involved, where the money is coming from, and making that investigation more robust. So you still have to know where to look.
Got it. And then how does that compare with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
It's very much the same, except Bitcoin specifically is just really easy to track. So that's an added benefit for law enforcement and regulators. You know exactly where the money has been and where it's going. What you don't necessarily know is who's holding it. But
so following the money is actually very simple because it's all on chain.
Yeah.
The difficulty comes in, I know wallet A has the money, send it to wallet B.
Yeah.
You don't know who owns wallet A or wallet B.
Right, not necessarily. So if they're standalone wallets, it's very tough to identify who's holding that money. In fact, I don't know these actual exact figures, but there's tons of Bitcoins just sitting in these wallets, and they're active, and somebody has it, and it's somehow tied to the original Silk Road, but people don't necessarily know
who has it.
So that's a challenge, but it is because of the immutable ledger, it is super easy to track the flow. And
would it be a fair categorization to say law enforcement in general, not just drug-focused agencies, but just in general, would rather a criminal use Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies than U.S. dollar physical cash because of the trackability? Or is it more nuanced than that?
Well, let me speak personally.
Yep.
I would much rather have criminals do everything through the dark web and cryptocurrencies because it is easy to track, and there are a ton of smart people that are working on ways to make it even more transparent and keep illicit funds out of this new ecosystem that's pretty much going mainstream.
Yeah, there's an agent at a government agency that one time said, in general, not just financial crimes, but in general, when a criminal is committing a crime, we'd rather have their hands on a keyboard, right? It was kind of the sentiment of like the digital footprint is much easier to track than the physical world across all things, right? Not just drugs or money laundering. And I thought that was really fascinating because that's a little counter narrative to the way the public thinks about the internet, right? It's like, oh, I can't see it, I can't touch it, so it must be easy to do that. It's actually not if you know what you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, and it is tough. I mean, there are techniques to hide who you are, where you are, and there are some people that are very good at that. Not everyone is, but ultimately, there's really smart people in the government that are working on this issue, and if there's only people are going to make mistakes at some point, and it's kind of like a traditional non-cyber investigation. Somebody will make a mistake that
a bad guy
will make a mistake, and law enforcement will be able to capitalize on that mistake and find out who that individual is. It's the same thing with cyber, but I think there's more signatures now when you're doing everything online.
Yeah, it's I've got a lot of friends in law enforcement, just having been in the military, and they all talk a lot about this idea that you don't think you break laws, but if a cop rode behind you for 30 minutes, you're going to break some law, right? It could be everything from your seatbelt's not on, to your lights, to you didn't use your blinker, to you jaywalked, to you dropped a stick of gum on the floor, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things, and the thing that I have found with most law enforcement is, again, very reasonable. The application of the law, right? I mean, you go out here on the streets of New York, there's people jaywalking all over the place. Cops aren't arresting people, right? They're not even writing them tickets. They're basically saying, hey, get the hell out of the road so you don't get hit by a car, right? And so I think that there's the severity of crimes and kind of the intention becomes really important, as well as, what does the book actually say?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's accurate. And really, it's like, I think law enforcement in general tries to really address the needs of a specific area and make it safer for people. I think there's really an honest effort for that law enforcement across the board at all levels.
For sure. All right, so we talked a little bit about Bitcoin and what I'll call like the public blockchains. What about the privacy coins? Like how do you see that fit into the overall ecosystem and maybe even how some criminals are using that versus Bitcoin, et cetera?
Yeah, so we see privacy coins are much harder to track, almost impossible. There are some techniques that we can use, but it is harder to identify. Smart companies are working on that issue constantly. Companies that do blockchain forensics are hiring cryptographers to figure out ways to crack certain codes and get insight into the way money is moved through Monero or Zcash, but that's really nascent right now. So I think it's tough. We don't have the data to understand how prevalent it is right now. We do have a lot of data for Bitcoin. We're starting to get more data for Ethereum. So it's hard to really estimate how prevalent it is with illicit transfer of funds. That being said, I think one of the biggest problems, not only in crypto, but for law enforcement in general, is the idea of going dark. With all of these encrypted communication tools, it's becoming more challenging to get access into content of conversations. Typically, traditional phone call that government wanted to intercept, they would establish enough probable cause to intercept that and then go to a judge and the judge would read the affidavit and say, yeah, I agree that you need to listen to their phone calls, and we'd get a phone tap and you could hear the content. Now it's not so simple. We have there's Signal and Telegram, and you can't necessarily FaceTime, and you can't necessarily listen to that. So that's going dark is a big problem. But ultimately, the way I look at it is, throughout the years, whether it's intel or law enforcement, the kind of low tech thing that you revert to is human intelligence, and I think that's what's going to happen until governmental technology catches up to the privacy coins. You're going to identify people that can give you information. So if if somebody's using Monero, you're going to find his associate, his legitimate friend that is also doing something illegal, and he doesn't want to go to jail, so he's going to spill the beans on the guy moving money through Monero. So I think that at some point you'll revert to the non-tech approach to investigations.
It's the whole idea. Bad people do bad things.
Yeah.
Bad people usually hang out with other bad people.
Yeah.
Right. And people are at the very core self-interested, and when they're facing jail time, fines, etc., all of a sudden they have a much better memory, right? And look, you can watch every crime documentary in the world, every movie, right? Talk to anyone who's ever been in law enforcement, and I think that's been true for 100+ years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How big or interested is government in general, right? So not even necessarily the DEA, but and I'm asking the guy who focuses on this, so we'll call out the bias immediately. But how big of a problem do you think that the government agencies think cryptocurrencies used for illicit means is, and how big of a focus is it versus, look, we're dealing with everything from Mexican cartels to other terrorist activities to whatever, and crypto is very, very small or low on the totem pole.
Yeah. So I think the way I look at that is you don't frame it as how big people think of this as being a problem, but how prevalent will it be in the future? Okay. And that's the way I look at it. I think right now it's in its infancy. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, we're still at the beginning of that, and while it's not less than 1% of Bitcoin is illicit, if the figures are correct, that doesn't sound like a huge problem, but as that 1% is a little misleading because there's more activity on it, there's more money being transacted, but the percentage of illegal transactions is going down. So that just means there's more legit purposes to using it, and that's a trend that I think we're going to see, from now and I think I'm very bullish on Bitcoin. So I think that that's going to be the future, and a few privacy coins may be the future. So I think me and a lot of other government people will they recognize that that's the future, and while it might not be a huge problem now, it will be something that we have to understand in the future, because all transactions will be cryptographic. Yep. Everything will be digital. There will be no more fiat. I mean, that's the way I see it.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I would tell the naysayers of digital currencies, right? The people who should be the least bullish or the most bearish on this stuff is law enforcement. People where it makes their jobs harder, right? Mm-hmm. I've actually found, with you and many others, it's the exact opposite, right? Because they spend so much time seeing how the technology works, what the benefits and the downsides are, there becomes more conviction, and of course the world's moving this way. Like the trend becomes more inevitable, which I find very fascinating.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that, and there's not a huge number of investigators that are looking at crimes through cryptocurrency or on the dark net, but those that are really passionate about and excited about that realm, and fully recognize that that's the way things are going. And there's definitely not there's no sentiment like hey, we got to get rid of these cryptocurrencies, we got to stop this. It's more like we just got to understand this, because this is how things are going to be.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. Yeah. Right, is like there's certain governments around the world who are saying, hey, we can stop this, right? We actually can stop it, and like we're going to ban it, we're going to do all this stuff. I haven't found it, literally to this day, I've not found one single person in the U.S. government, whether they are law enforcement, they are a regulator, they are a representative, etc. Everyone we've talked to, I've never heard that sentiment. I've always heard, this is going to happen. We think that there's a high probability of this happening. How do we create rules that protect people? How do we encourage innovation? Like, it's very kind of forward thinking without wanting to ban or stop the progress.
Absolutely. I definitely see that. And if you listen to, the heads of the SEC and CFTC and FinCEN and all of the people that are dealing with the civil side and upper echelons dealing with the law enforcement side, everyone addresses encouraging innovation. But you also have to keep the market safe. And if you want more money to come in, and if you want institutional investors and your retail investors to feel comfortable in this realm, it has to be safe. And that's the balancing act, encouraging innovation and at the same time keeping the market safe.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about privacy coins, and I think that is a challenge for everyone, especially law enforcement. Are there other challenges that you guys face that maybe others don't know about or that you spend your time thinking about?
Yeah, I think now this challenge is very specific, I think, to what I experienced, but and it's probably across the board in law enforcement, but it's our systems, our internal systems are built to handle a traditional real world investigation. So molding a crypto investigation into the existing rails that we have to work on is sometimes challenging. So it causes some roadblocks to forward momentum. But there's really smart people at headquarters level that are trying to sort that out. So that's a very specific problem to my realm. In terms of other challenges, I think it's just money laundering is complicated in general. I mean, whether it's fiat or crypto, good money laundering just it goes unnoticed.
That's the purpose, right?
It's the whole purpose of it. So keeping up with the technology and understanding what can be done, not only getting insight into how criminals are using privacy coins or other coins, but what's even out there to be used is very challenging because there's so much information. And I try to, stay up to date on what's happening on the overall crypto landscape, but it's daunting. And, especially with Ethereum tokens, ERC20 tokens, you can essentially, hop back and forth between different tokens and being able to track that, and you can write smart contracts to automatically facilitate all of this movement of these funds, and it becomes completely obscured if you don't have the right software to really flesh that out. So just staying up to date on what is possible to use is a task. It's like a full-time job in itself.
I've never thought about this, but it's hard enough for fund managers, entrepreneurs, people in the crypto industry in terms of every single day that's their job. The people who their job necessarily didn't start out in crypto, but it's led them there, like yours. Staying on top of the latest fork or the latest technology, plus also conducting investigations. It's probably not the simplest thing in the world.
It's tough, and I don't come from a super heavy tech background. I did some work in the Intel community on a tech project, but a lot of what I'm doing now is just on the job training and learning how to make sense of this and talking to the right people, that the smart people in this ecosystem. And that's one thing I love about the crypto space. I'll go to meetups and events and just talk to people, and everyone's just so willing to share their knowledge and meet up for coffee and kind of understand what I'm working on and how they can help. And so the community is just a really friendly community. So that's one thing.
Part of it is the education leads hopefully to awareness and adoption, right? And so it's fascinating to have this conversation with you. Before we wrap up, I'll ask you some kind of rapid fire questions. I'll avoid some of the crypto ones. I don't want to put you on the spot in terms of what the most important company in crypto is or anything like that. But what's the most important book you've ever read?
Let's see. I think two.
Two. Oh, what is
yeah.
that? I've never heard of that.
No. So I'll give
2 books. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was going to say,
So,
you got a book I've never heard of before.
So one is The 4 Pillars of Investing by, I think, the author is William Bernstein. And I think coming from a non-finance background, that book was really important to understand how to make a well-balanced portfolio and diversify my funds, and it was easily digestible. And the second book is really obscure, and you probably haven't heard of it, but it's called Conversations for Action.
Oh, I've not heard of this.
Yeah, it's a collection of essays, and I think the author is Fernando Flores. I think he's Chilean.
Okay.
But he just him and his cohorts thought a lot about how to move projects along. It's geared towards business, but he came to the conclusion that conversations, and this isn't like earth-shattering, but conversations are everything when you're working to facilitate something and make change. And he just outlines ways to properly communicate to achieve a goal. So that's been really important to how I interact with people in my job, personal relationships, and in general.
Conversations for Action?
Yeah, Conversations for Action, a collection of essays.
Cool.
I think the author is Flores. Yeah.
Did you use that on the bikers?
Yeah, I pulled that out.
You said, I got some new tactics. That's awesome. All right, before I let you ask me one question to end it, aliens, real, not real?
100% real.
Okay,
yeah,
not the DEA's perspective. This is his personal perspective.
That's a different topic for another day.
So 100% real.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the probability that we're the only intelligent species in the universe, I think it doesn't make sense. So yeah, I think extraterrestrials are there, and I probably think that either in our life or the next lifetime, there will be
some
contact. There will be like irrefutable information that there's something else out there.
Got it. And would you rather go to space or the depths of the ocean?
I think I'd rather... Space scares me more. I just get this impression of like just isolation. There was like that movie, I think it was Julia Roberts. She was like sucked out to space. It's terrifying. I think that would be it's more scary, but also more interesting at the same time.
All right.
Yeah.
That's not a bad answer. The fact that it's scary makes it more interesting.
Yeah.
That's fair. What one question you have for me?
Oh, so we met once before, and
so everyone knows, we had to meet first so that we could make sure that he was allowed to do this. So I'm incredibly thankful to him and his team for letting him do this.
Yeah. But I had so many questions after that conversation. I think one thing that I'm curious about is how you go about making complicated decisions, whether it's personal life or business decisions. If you have a certain model for that, whether it's a gut feeling, if you have a framework that you kind of fall back on.
I think I always did something similar to this, but when I worked at Facebook, there was they have all these posters that hang on the wall, and some of them are, frankly, kind of fluffy, motto type stuff, and some of them are actually pretty good. And one that I really resonated with me was done is better than perfect, right? Yeah. And it was this idea that when it comes to decision making, within a decision there may be actually 4 or 5 smaller decisions, right? So should we make this investment or not, right, is a complex decision. It seems binary, but actually there's a bunch of other little things that go into it, right? Do I trust this founder or not? Do I think this market is real or not, right? Kind of all of that stuff. And the way that done is better than perfect is more about the probability of being right, and also focusing on the 1 or 2 micro decisions that actually make up 80-90% of the big decision, right? So in investing, the complex decision of should I invest or not, whether I'm right or wrong on this, what I have concluded is 80 or 90% of that decision comes down to, do I want to back this founder, right? And if I want to back this founder, the rest of the things are actually much less important than backing the founder. If I back the founder, then I'm going to do the deal, right? And so that's an example of the decision of should I invest or not actually gets boiled down to something that's a little bit more easily you can wrap your head around. And there's an argument that a lot of that's gut feeling, right? Intuition, all that kind of stuff, which isn't a great way to make decisions repeatably and have a high probability of success. But the way that my partners and I think about that is you're talking about a highly complex environment somebody's going into. And so everything they're pitching you, it's going to change, right? Good, negative, neutral. It's not going to be the same. The product they build, their competitors, the market dynamics. If you bet on the right person to figure it out, that feels like the most important thing, right? And so I think that done is better than perfect is a way to move quickly, not necessarily break things, but just continue to, can I be right in 80% of the decisions I make? And right is not defined as I hit a home run with every decision, but I'm more right than wrong with each decision, right? That type of stuff.
No, that's good. When you're backing a founder, do you ever experience that you really think the founder is going to go far, but don't really agree with his vision for the product or the company? Or do you feel like there's a strong correlation with a strong founder and also a strong
it's a great question. I don't know if we've ever backed a founder where love the founder, hate the idea, right? Like kind of very visceral opposite feelings. Definitely have backed founders that we were like, wow, this is a great founder. I don't get it, right? So not that I disagree, but you're way more expert than me at this space. I kind of understand why this is important. I hear you on what you're doing. I don't know if it's going to work or not, right? So kind of this like in between positive and negative sentiment. Definitely have been backed a number of founders, and actually some of them have proven to be our best founders, which is an interesting data point in that it's almost like they had information that so few other people had, and they understood a problem that so few other people did, that there was less competition there, right? And again, deciding to back the right founder. If we like the idea and we like the founder, that's great. If we like the founder and the idea is kind of in the maybe category, I've learned to trust the pattern recognition of that actually might be even better, right? So still kind of figuring that out mentally. But again, I don't think we've ever backed a founder, love the founder, hate the idea, right? Yeah. I've backed companies that I love the founder, idea is pretty good, hate the name, right, or something like that, but never hate the idea and love the founder. So listen, man, this is fantastic. I think that a lot of people are really going to enjoy hearing kind of more from your perspective. I have found you to be incredibly reasonable and intelligent on crypto and kind of everything that's going on. So thank you so much for kind of spending the time to come do this and navigate everything internally. Yeah. Hopefully they're happy with kind of everything that we covered, and we'll have to bring you on again after a couple of months and see if anything's changed.
Yeah, I'd love to come back on. This has been a lot of fun.
We'll just bring you on, and you can do the daily headline reads of crypto hacks and crimes, right? All right, thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Anthony.